I was first introduced to the concept and the act of generosity when I began my spiritual journey. I decided I wanted to start with Buddhism. I recall why it was that I began a spiritual journey, but I don't recall why it was that I chose Buddhism. I knew nothing about it, besides the Oriental cultural influence that I associated with it, plus the fat statue. I thought the figure that represented Buddhism looked joyful, and coming from a place of sadness, I was drawn to this contrasting representation. The first truth: life is suffering. Suffering comes in many forms, the three most fundamental forms being old age, sickness, and death. However, the Buddhists believe that it tends to go much deeper than that. The truth is, life is not ideal. Life fails to live up to our expectations, and as humans we are subject to certain desires and cravings. And even when our desires are satisfied, it's only temporarily. Shortly after, we go back to our original state of desire and craving. The second truth: the origins of our suffering. Besides our immediate worries, such as injury or the loss of a loved one, the deeper rooted origins also come from greed and desire, which is represented by the rooster, ignorance or delusion, which is represented by the pig, and finally hatred and destructive urges, which is represented by the snake. The third truth: the possibility of liberation from suffering. The Buddha was a living example that this is possible in a human lifetime. This is in reference to nirvana, meaning extinguishing. Attaining nirvana means extinguishing the three fires of greed, delusion, and hatred. Having lived in Cambodia for an extended period of time, a predominantly Buddhist country, I began to observe the ways in which their faith may have influenced their behaviours and the way in which they operate as a society. I recall doing some research on the benefits of showing generosity and how it can have positive impacts on your mental and emotional health, and so I set out to put this combination of newfound spiritual and scientific knowledge to the test. I was on my way to work one morning and riding my bicycle through town when I came to a stop at a set of traffic lights. It was there I spotted a man sitting on the side of the road in a wheelchair. He was an elderly man with no legs, and he sat there with a hat in his hand, signaling to those who rode past that he was asking for donations, and he was obviously incapable of working for his own money. This man looked poor to begin with, and the fact that he was unable to work meant his life was one of struggle and misfortune. And I watched closely as I spotted a tuk-tuk driver hand him over some money and place it in his hat. You know, these tuk-tuk drivers earn an average of $10 a day, and most have families to feed. This wasn't the only time I saw people who struggled financially hand out money to those who were flat broke. It was actually a common occurrence, and I gathered that there was a certain mentality amongst the people whereby those who handed out money were less concerned with having excess amounts, even though that wasn't an option for most middle-class people. However, they saw the importance of being generous with what they had, and you know, if they had enough to feed themselves, then whatever was left over should go to someone who's unable to feed themselves. And in a sense, as much as you might think you are struggling, there's always someone else out there who's doing worse, and as a result, it's your duty to make a contribution to the best of your capabilities. From a spiritual standpoint, if we go back to the Four Noble Truths in Buddhism, we see that one of the causes of human suffering has to do with our desires and cravings as human beings. And besides the immediate causes of suffering, which are illness or death, our deep-rooted causes of suffering may come from our greed. If the Buddhists believe in the liberation of suffering, then it is obvious to me why generosity is such a valued act in their society. I came to the conclusion that the act of generosity is the counter-weapon against greed, and therefore has the potential to reduce our suffering as human beings. From my own experience, it's always felt good to be generous, and research is starting to show that generosity affects our brains and health, possibly even extending our lives. The feel-good effects of giving begin in the brain. When people show acts of generosity, there are chemicals in the brain that are triggered in the mesolimbic pathway, which recognizes rewarding stimuli. When these acts are performed, there are several happiness chemicals, including dopamine and endorphins, which give people a sense of euphoria. Oxytocin is also released, the chemical associated with feelings of peace and tranquility. Some experts suggest that evolution isn't just about the survival of the fittest, but also dependent on how one can thrive in a group or community. As a result of the Khmer Rouge genocide in the 1970s, Cambodian society has been torn down to its core and forced to rebuild from almost nothing. In order to survive, it's vital that one sees the value of working together as a community. And I say this for two reasons. One, you never know when you're going to need help. And two, the benefits of working as a team, combining minds and spirit, far outweigh the benefits of working for yourself. But in a study published in Nature Communications, researchers at the University of Zurich conducted a study where 50 participants were promised varied sums of money that they would receive in the near future. One group were told to spend the money on themselves, while the other group chose to spend the money on others. Surprisingly enough, the areas of the brain associated with generosity and happiness interacted intensely in those who chose to give money to others. This study shows that performing acts of generosity is enough to boost personal happiness. Then it is fair to say that through our liberation from suffering, we can use the act of generosity as an antidote, a medicine prescribed to reduce our pain, plus make the world around us a better place in which we can live and thrive.